Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Second Kings. We're now in chapter 12. When we begin in chapter 12, I think we need to just review that at the end of chapter 11, when we did yesterday, we were reminded that Jehoash was 7 years old when he became king. And so we do have a little bit of timeline that we can calibrate here. What you do find is that in each of these chapters that we have dealt with so far, we've been dealing with the northern kingdom of Ahav, and then his son died because of Jehu, and Jehu also killed the southern king's throne, and then the yesterday we talked about the southern kingdom where the mother became the queen instead for 7 years. So in the seventh year, we had Jehoash come out, presented himself. And so that was what we have seen in chapter 11. Now, with chapter 12, we begin this. In the seventh year of Jehu, Jehoash became king, and he reigned for 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zivia of Beersheba. We can actually look at this from a timeline standpoint. The northern kingdom, and then we have the southern kingdom. For our purposes, we need to realize that Jehu became king when Ahaziah's mother became queen, Athaliah. So we can actually draw a line. And when we draw this line, we can actually see Yoram ended here. And then we have Ahaziah ended here. And then the queen mother, which she became queen, Athaliah, became queen. And after 6 years, meaning on the seventh year, she was killed. Now, here we have Jehu. This actually occurred at the same year, and we find that it says here Jehu reigned after his seventh year. So we find that in the seventh year of Jehu, then we have Jehoash became king. Now think of it this way: Jehoash has another name, Joash. Remember, Joram has another name, Jehoram. These Hebrew names are quite interesting. Jehoram is the long form, Joram the short form. So Jehoash is the long form, Joash is the short form. So what this meant was that Jehoash or Joash became king after Athaliah, and that would be in the seventh year of Jehu. And after 6 years of Athaliah, we find Jehoash became king, and this went on for 40 years. That's a very long reign. We read in verse 2, Jehoash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. This would be eyes of the Lord. All his days that Jehoiada, the priest, instructed him. So we find that Jehoash was very young. He was only 7 years old when he became king. And he needed a mentor. So you can see that Jehoiada is the mentor who guided him. And he did what was right. This is Yasha. What was straight. What God considered to be the right thing. Now it's interesting you find that Zivia was the wife of the son of Athaliah, who is Ahaziah, the wife was not so bad. And so we find that Ziphiah from Beersheba uh, was married to Ahaziah or Ahaziahu, we call him. And she turned out to be a very good mother. And she was named in verse 1. Now, for 6 years, she wasn't with the son, Jehoash, because it wasn't safe. And now we can see that she could be reunited with the son again. Look at verse 3. After everything is said that Jehoash did what was right in the eyes of God, then we see that there was a complaint. Only the high places, this would be the Bamot, that's the plural, Bama is the singular. These are what we call altars. Altars in the high places did not end. The people still sacrificed and burnt incense on the high places. Now, this, by the way, we can actually see this itself is not really idolatry. This is not idolatry. There is already the destruction of the temple of Baal, the priest of Baal. And so, what is this Bama? These would be what we call private altars. God had forbidden private altars when there was a location that he appointed in Jerusalem, first in Shiloh, then in Jerusalem. But people, at least some of them, were still keeping these as their own private altars without having to go to Jerusalem. And that is what it means by the high places. Usually, these altars are really found in high places, meaning on top of a hill. We read in verse 4, and then Jehoash said to the priests. Now, we don't know how long that has been because this and then means sometime thereafter. In verse 2 and 3, it is a background of the life of Jehoash. Didn't talk about his life when he was 8 years old, 9 years old, but as he grew up, he was mentored by Jehoiada. And after a period, Jehoash would have been old enough. And he said to the Kohanim, he says, all the money of the sacred offerings which is brought into the temple in current money. Now, what was this? These were the money of people who come by, both the money of each man's assessment, the value that he has to pay per head, and all the money which anyone's heart prompts him to bring into the house of the Lord. This will be free will offering, was to be collected. Verse 5, the priests are to take it for themselves, each from his acquaintance, or you find that each from the fellow priests, and then they shall repair the damage to the house wherever damage is found. There needs to be a repair for the temple, and money needs to be obtained. And so there was money given, but the money was never enough. So we find in verse 6 says, and then it came about in the 23rd year of King Jehoash. He reigns for 40 years. Now, in the middle of that reign, he found that the priests had not repaired any damage to the temple. And so King Jehoash summoned Jehoiada, the priest, and the other priests and said to them, why do you not repair damage to the house? Now then, you are not to take any more money from your fellow man, but give it up for the damage of the house. Meaning, don't take any money for yourselves and use the money for the repair. That was the emphasis. Verse 8. And then, after that was said by Jehoiada to agree with Jehoash, the priests then agreed that they will not take any money from the people, nor would they repair damage to the house. Now, this word repair, would they repair damage to the house, doesn't really quite read that way. The idea here is they should, let's say, they should rather give it for the repair of the house. So instead of the priest taking the money will be set aside for the repair of the temple. That would be a proper way of translating. Verse 9. Instead, Jehoiada the priest. Now, this word instead, I think it's wrong. It should be just and then. It is not instead. So, and then Jehoiada, the priest, took the chest and drilled a hole in its lid and put it beside the altar on the right side as one comes into the house of the Lord. And the priest who guarded the threshold put all the money that was brought into the house. Meaning, when the chest was full, well, they would take the money. When they saw that there was a great amount of money in the chest, the king's scribe, the high priest, went up, tied it in bags, counted the money that was found in the Lord's house. So you find that this would be all the donations that is given, and they would not use it for themselves, but they use it for the repair of the temple. Verse 11. And then they handed the money which was assessed over to those who did the work, that is, to repair the temple, who had the oversight of the house of the Lord. They paid it out to the carpenters, the builders, who worked on the house of the Lord for the repair. So instead of taking the normal money, they would actually put a box out there to collect additional funds so that they could repair the house of God. And to the masons, the stone cutters for buying timber, and wood is very expensive to cut stone to repair the damage to the house of the Lord, for everything that was laid out for the house to repair it. Verse 13. However, they were not made for the house of the Lord silver cups, the pitchers, the musical instruments. Not these are not shears. These are the musical instruments, bowls, uh, basins, shofars, any receptacles of gold or silver from the money which was brought into the house of the Lord, which means that the money that was collected was all for the repair. It says here, for they gave that to those who did the work, and with it they repaired the house of the Lord. So during this time in the reign of Jehoash, the house of the Lord was being repaired. 15. They did not require an accounting from the men whose hands they gave the money to pay to those who did the work, because they acted faithfully. Now, this is really interesting, because the way that they did governance wasn't so much as to check every cent that came in. Uh, the reason they did not have an accounting or did not reckon was that they were all acting honestly. This was for the house of God. This is the word uh, emunah. Now, emunah comes from the word steady, faithful, firmly, and honestly is a good way of expressing that they are dependable, right? Dependable. They are not here to cheat. Verse 16, the money from the guilt offerings, the asham, and the money for sin offering, the khatta, was not brought into the house of the Lord. It belonged to the priest. So we need to go back and read Leviticus chapters 1 to 7. And you know there are things that is owned by the priest and the priest who did the offerings for the people. We come to verse 17. Now, verse 17 begins a new story, I guess you can say that. And this word is then. This is not and then. This is really the word then at this time or at that time. That would be a better way to express it. It is not and then. And that would be after what happened in the previous verse. At this time would be this meaning of then. We find that Hazael, the king of Aram of Syria, went up and fought against Gath and captured it. And Hazael was intent on going up against Jerusalem. Here we need to understand the terrain. So uh, we have the Galilee, and this is the Jordan, and then we have the Dead Sea. So now we would find that Jerusalem will be here, and God is just here, just a little bit out of Jerusalem. Hazael is in Syria. And so what he did was he came all the way down. The idea was to come all the way down because he already took this part. And he crossed over and took Gath. Now, Gath is one of those main cities that the Philistines had that belongs to Judah. And so you find that Hazael is really contending against Judah now because the northern part on the eastern shore of the Jordan that belongs to Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh was already taken by Hazael. So he's coming down and he's actually knocking on Jehoash's door. So we read down in verse 18. Verse 18 begins this way, and then, this is the correct and then, knowing that Hazael is here, King Jehoash of Judah took all the sacred offerings that Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, Ahaziah, his fathers, kings of Judah, had consecrated, set aside, and his own sacred offerings, all the gold that was found among the treasuries of the house of the Lord and of the king's house. And the strange thing he did was that he sent them to Hazael, king of Aram. What does this mean? This means that Jehoash was giving a tribute to Hazael, meaning Jehoash is conceding. He doesn't want to go to war, and he is afraid of Hazael. And he says, Hazael, I'll give you money and I'll give you tribute. And look at what he has given. All the sacred things, all the gold in the house of the Lord, and gave it to Hazael. With that, Hazael withdrew from Jerusalem. Now, this is very serious because when we say Jehoash did all that was yasha in the eyes of God, what he did was he stayed on course to want to do what is right. But towards the end of his life, at this point in time, he was not willing to defend Jerusalem. He was not willing to trust God to defend Jerusalem. Verse 19. Now, when we come to verse 19, you find that it says, now the remainder of the acts of Joash, so you recall, Joash is the same as Jehoash. Same name, right? It says the remainder of the acts. He did a lot of things, but these were the highlights that everything he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the king of Judah? Now you find that this was the same treasure of the mighty kingdom of David and Solomon, and he used that treasure to buy safety from Hazael. That was itself conceding everything that they've got. That Judah has no more respect from Hazael. Verse 20. You'll find that at the end of the life of Jehoash or Joash, it ends in a conspiracy assassination. Verse 20. And then the servants, seeing this, rose up, and then they revolted. Now, this is the word revolted. In verse 20, it is the same word as Athaliah saying, cashier, cashier. This is an alliance. And this is an alliance against Joash. Why? Because these were the ones who felt that the king should defend Jerusalem from Hazael instead of conceding to Hazael. And the acts that they did was this. And then, this word is and then, what they did was they struck, caused to strike, and then killed Joash. The idea of and then killed Joash, you find that these are just one singular word. This word, they struck and killed. This is one word. This is one word, and this word here is cause to strike, to kill. See, when you strike, you may not kill, but in this case, they struck to kill. So understand this is just one word, and it describes this. At the house of Milo as he was going down to Sila. And obviously, he died, right? So we have an assassination in verse 20. Now we come to the final verse for today. Verse 21. Now, this word is very strange. I don't know why it was translated this way, but it should be better translated as Yo Zabat, Josaphat, right? Josaphat, and not Yozaka. This is a wrong translation. His name is Yozavad, the son of Shimyat, and Yehozavad, the son of Shomer, his servants. Notice these were two names that we are given. These are the names of the servants who struck him. And then he died. And they buried him with his fathers in the city of David. Now, the final word is this. And then, after this, and then his son Amaziah became king in his place. Now, I think one of the things that we tend to get confused is these words. Amaziah was also the name of a northern king. Yes. And so you find Joram or Jehoram, both north and south. Amaziah, both north and south. And these would be very common names because they're all Hebrew names. And we can now see that after Jehoash or Joash had died, his son Amaziah then took on his place after 40 years. It is a sad ending to the reign of Joash. He started really well. He was one of those who really cared about the temple of the Lord. He was one of those who want to make sure that things are well kept. He gave instructions and he made sure that it was carried out to take care of the house of God. But towards the end of his life, he decided to concede to Hazael. And he gave all the valuables in the sanctuary to Hazael, all the gold instruments. And that is why the conspiracy to assassinate him came about, because he was no longer worthy to be king. Now, it's a sad end. We're not here to judge on the moral right and wrong, but we are told, based on this historical event, Amaziah is now king of Judah. And so, with this, we come to the end of our session today.